Welcome to Decoding Leadership. I'm really excited to introduce Matt Otis. I met Matt from our time together at New Relic. Matt has built a career out of training people at New Relic, National Instruments, AWS, and Ledger, among other places. I was incredibly impressed with the training at New Relic. I think it was really exceptional. And so I invited him to join us today to give us an insight into what role training plays in learning organizations and how engineering leaders can think of the role of training in their organizations. It's really nice to have you on the show, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so tickled when you reached out. Just the training I got to do with you and with other people at New Relic was just honestly one of the pleasures of my career. Such an amazing team that was assembled, and I just loved how there were so many leaders there, and there was so little like ego wrapped up in everything, and everybody was just so focused in on the product and how we could get that out the door. And yeah, it was like we kind of captured lightning in a bottle, at least for a few years there. And I was honestly like so many times when I was with you and with others at New Relic, I was just like, I'm just lucky to be in this room. Like, I don't know how I got in this door, what really happened there. So I know for me, it's almost a little bit like the high school jock reminiscing about like, oh, whenever I was on the football team. But man, it really was a great time. And I really loved seeing also where everybody, as they did move on, because in tech you have to move on every few years to keep growing, to kind of see where people are going and what they're doing and so forth.
I think so many of us feel the same way about that time. It was a really incredible moment in a lot of our careers, and I think there was something about the New Relic work culture at that time that was so focused on like continuous improvement, and I think the learning and training became like a really large part of that. And so I'm really kind of curious to hear your perspective on a lot of things. Maybe we can start with the topic of like a lot of people, a lot of engineering leaders haven't really thought deeply about what is involved in training. And as an expert in this topic, how should we how should we think about training as a part of like building a successful organization that produces really good results for customers? Like what where does it fit in?
That is a fantastic question, and really something that people come up with over and over again of like, how can I train my people? And a lot of that becomes one of these pieces of like, you've got these employees, you know they're talented, like you wouldn't have hired them unless you knew there was something there that you loved that they're able to do, or you could see at least the potential for. So whenever it comes down to training, one of the first things whenever I came into New Relic, or honestly any of the other places I've been at, is we do some sort of gap analysis. Basically, we just say like, what are the tasks that I need my people to be able to do here? And then we say, okay, I've got this list of tasks or these things I'm kind of hoping for. And honestly, sometimes I'll spend more time in this phase with an engineering manager than almost any other phase of the training and development. We'll basically say like, I'll talk with the managers, or I'll talk with the leaders or directors or whatever, and we'll say like, all right, I need my people trained better. And then I'll have to come back to them and just say, what do you mean by that? Like, what is it that, like, where are all your employees now? And where is it that you want them to be in the future? And then that oftentimes leads into some really big discussions that aren't just do a training on how to do this in a Postgres database or something like that. Like, the training is oftentimes one of those things of like, at first people don't know, and then you have to define like, what do I actually want them to know? And then a lot of times you'll find out that the training encompasses really kind of two different levels, I would say. So the gap analysis, like I'm here at point A, I want to get to point B. Like, one of the things I try to really separate out whenever I'm doing training gap analysis is I try to separate out, is this a skill issue? Is this something like, I hired these people and I know they have raw talent, but they don't know how to do blank? There's also the motivation issue. So one good example of that is at New Relic, I was asked, all right, we want to do a training on open source projects. Like, how do people do open source projects? And everybody I went to within the engineering department, I was like, hey, do you know about open source projects? And they were like, yeah, of course. And I was like, do you know how to contribute to them? Yes. Well, why aren't you contributing to them? And then it was like, I don't have time. I don't have this thing here. If I do this work, then that other piece gets kind of knocked down, or my manager said, stop spending time on that. You got to work on this thing over here. So in that particular case, it wasn't a skills issue at all, pretty much across the department. Like there were maybe a few people, especially some of the newer folks that maybe didn't truly know, but that oftentimes is just like a discussion that happens. So in that particular case, that was just a motivation issue. So I came back and I was like, the training is your motivation. You as managers have people that know how to do a thing. They're not doing a thing. You want them to do a thing, but they have no incentive to do it. So what can we do to change our process and change our motivation there? So as far as training goes, I'm a manager. I want to create training. The first step you need to do, or like if I worked with somebody, the first step I would do is I would say, hey, what is it you want to actually happen? And I've actually, with some like consulting work, I've actually completely encouraged people to absolutely don't spend any money with me developing training, because I was like, you know what, there's literally nothing I can help you with here. This is purely your processes. I'm happy to help you with those, but that's not a training issue at all. And that was a good, healthy discussion for them.
That's so interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying is that like an engineering leader, or really leaders in general, should view training as like a partner that can help with skills and would you also say like information, like sharing information and kind of like context?
Yeah, that's that is a great point. So one of the challenges that I run into as a trainer is this kind of weird situation of, as a trainer, there's literally no way for me to know every topic that's out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So for example, like if you wanted to like bring me in and say like, hey Matt, train our employees on the latest JavaScript framework. Like I'm not really going to be that person for you, but I could probably talk to the person that needs to do that and get that information out, create it in a way that we can actually present a training and so forth. But I think we got on to a really important part there, is we kind of mentioned the gap analysis. Like I'm here and I want to go there. There's another idea too within the training industry called the 70-20-10 principle. And basically what that is going to say is that people learn 70% by doing, 20% by peers and mentors, and about 10% in some sort of formal training. So when you're talking about training, it is actually this really big thing, and it's this thing that should constantly be taking place. However, the formal part of it is usually pretty small. The formal part is just addressing the skill. And then the peer and mentor might take that skill set that like you learned that little piece, and then you say, okay, let's go ahead and turn that thing better. And then they're going to need time to work on it. So I can't come in and say like, hey, as a manager, I want to train my people to do this. By the end of the week, they should be able to do it. And by next week, we're rolling forward at 100% and everybody's great and it's all trained and we're just happy and hugging it out at the end. Like that's, it's a process.
So it seems like it must be really interesting to be a trainer who often your job is to train people in skills that you don't have. How does that work in practice? And
Yeah.
how should engineering leaders think of that? Like, if I came to you and I said I need to train my organization on using Kafka well or something like
Yeah.
that, like we're making this big push and it's important for our product strategy and we need that skill set to be like really up leveled in our organization or something.
Yeah.
Like, how would you approach something like that?
Sure thing. So, I mean, there's really like a couple of options there. There is always the option that somebody out there lucked into being an expert on Kafka and they happen to know a lot about it. And there's probably somebody in the field doing a Kafka training that you can purchase, usually for a lot of money, and then hire them in as a consultant for that particular thing. That's always an option.
Yeah.
However, that tends to be a really expensive option.
Yeah.
So then you're going to probably say like, and like maybe this is actually an issue we ran into with some of our stuff, is that we didn't want to bring a consultant in because then they see what's happening behind the scenes. And so therefore that's not allowed. And that means that we're back to how do I get my own people to do it. So somebody like me
Uh,
is going to say like, okay, we have an issue. Something's going on with Kafka. I don't personally know this, but here's the deal. I think maybe that's my biggest personal skill set is my ability to be okay with asking questions that make me look maybe a little bit stupid.
mm,
So I'm going to go to the different people that basically you find somebody, you're looking at the gap analysis A to B, and you find somebody that's up here at this level performing where you want to say be at. And you basically say like, what are you doing? How are you doing it? When you see other people trying to do it, what mistakes are they making? And you kind of come through and you find yourself a whole bunch of different like skills along the way. And you say, okay, well, this skill has this as a some sort of like precursor skill.
mm,
And you kind of go through that and then you can create this kind of skill piece. Because again, skill, motivation. There might also be some of the motivation issues in Kafka. Like maybe your
yeah,
team was really tied to some other infrastructure that they set up, and they feel like us moving to Kafka means that my work was no longer meaningful. And
right.
so I don't know, maybe as a manager, you need to have some sort of like appreciation moment of like, this was really great work you did. We loved your baby.
Yeah,
And now we're going to slowly migrate your baby somewhere else. It's going to go
right.
to a better place.
Yeah.
And that might be a large chunk of what you need to get that hurdle to help your folks move forward.
I love how you kind of talk about this work as also being kind of partnering with other change agents. So it's like it seems like the way you view training is there's like a certain objective and then you bring a set of skills to that. And it's almost like a it almost seems like a like guide or like you go find out what the territory looks like, kind of help people understand what the route is to building the skill in that area. You're an expert at kind of like almost like trail marking or something. And then you kind of can help people help create some sort of structures for people to get through that path. Is
That's
that a good mental model
That's
or
a
is
very good mental model because a lot of times things break down. Of whenever I talk to somebody, um, a good example is whenever I worked with the company Ledger. They had a support team, and we were building out this like global support system, so it was pretty cool. But one of the pieces that kept coming up was with some of our teams, like certain of our teams didn't seem to have the soft skills that the other teams did, and it was really me going in there and talking to them made me have to find out, what do you mean by soft skill? Is it like they're just not being kind enough? Is there maybe a language barrier? Perhaps they're like not speaking in their native language, so this is like sounding a little harsher. So we can teach them some additional pieces. We might need an additional resource, like we might have some sort of resource that says like, when we say this, we phrase it like that. So there's lots of different pieces there. So just coming in, asking some of those formative questions, and this really gets me to there's actually just one of the guides I use is this thing called Bloom's taxonomy. It's relatively old, but I really like it because what it does is it basically says like there's different levels of skill that we want to get. Like, do I want somebody to just be able to regurgitate this thing back to me, or do I need somebody to be like an absolute master in their craft and able to synthesize new information from somewhere brand new? And so every piece along there is kind of a step on the chain. But Bloom's
mm,
taxonomy really helps me in the sense of it gives me some verbs to use. So basically the different levels, and it's typically shown out as like a triangle or something like that. And a good rule of thumb is if it's ever like a simplistic shape in science, then that means it's kind of a lie, but there might be some truth in it. So in this case here, like you've got remembering, you've got understanding, you've got application, analysis, and evaluation. And
oh
then
nice.
finally creation. So basically what I love to do is I love to go in and I love to find some of the words that are there. Like instead of saying, I want to train my team on this, typically I'm trying to get a team up to something like the application or the analysis level is going to
Mm,
be a good functioning level. An architect might be more in an evaluate or create level. There's not a lot of trainings for them because like kind of like everybody needs physics 101 before they can go on into any other area in engineering. And similarly, like everybody needs kind of like a base synthesis, like the knowledge and understanding and application. So instead of saying like, hey, I want to train people to do this, I might look through, there's like a list of verbs I've got pulled up over here. and I might need them to be able to like classify, like, is this like with the Kafka system, like I need to classify, like, is this data supposed to go there or is that data supposed to go here? And I might have some sort of activity that has them classify all the different pieces in a data structure and where they would belong. So that would be one of the pieces of the secret sauce as to how to develop training, is just use actual verbs. And training and know are basically like your big no-no words. Like if you say, I want people to know blank, then no. People will
No,
just
no,
nod
no.
their, yeah, no. Yeah. People will always say, like, you run into this everywhere. It's like, as a trainer, one of the big mistakes we make as trainers a lot of times is like, we'll say something like, does that make sense? And as a good trainer, there's actually like, you have this like piece in your heart that you really want to know, like, did that make sense to you? If not, I would love to explain it to you in a different way. Let's work on this until it makes sense. But does that make sense is one of those questions that for some reason, at least in English, only results in the answer of like, oh yeah, like maybe like 1 in 50 of my customers will actually be like, no, that didn't make sense. But almost everybody's like, oh yeah, that made sense. Because they don't want to look stupid in front of everybody else. They don't want to even like, or maybe it did make sense, but maybe not fully. So I'm going to have to like keep asking probing questions. And kind of the inverse of does that make sense is,
What about this doesn't make sense?
yeah, maybe what about this doesn't make sense? Or have I answered your question? Like basically like whatever you can do is like, this is just trainer tricks and tips, which we don't need so much here, but as a trainer, like as a manager, you're having to train things. So instead of like putting the onus on them, did it make sense to you? You need to always, in trainer mode, every problem is your problem. So like if somebody didn't learn something, it's because you didn't teach it well. And so in that case, I always in my classes would say like, did I explain this well enough? Is there anything else I could help answer here? Anything along those lines, because that's literally my job, is to help you. And if I'm not helping you, then we should all just leave the room. Like there's no point.
When I think back to some of the best trainings I've been a part of, they've really affected me very deeply. Like I remember in particular, it seems like every 6 months or so, I hear somebody say something like, remember that executive presence training class we took at New Relic 10 years ago? That was such a good training. And I remember this specific thing I learned from that. Some training courses can really change the way you think about your work. They can give you skills that you never had. But a lot of us that aren't in training, it's kind of hard for us to evaluate what like whether something is a good training or not, and in any other way other than like how it feels. Like it, yeah, I felt like that was a good training. How do you know if a training is successful or not? What should you expect out of a good training? How do you assess a training?
Sure thing. Well, the proper way to do it is use like the Kirkpatrick 4 levels. So,
Wow.
and so there's basically like, there's different modes of analysis that you would do in training. So you would have a reaction, which is basically like a smile survey. So like at the end of the course, you would say like on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy were you with this? And those are the ones that us as trainers love, because then like somebody like me, like I'm relatively talented, I can make you happy by the end of it, and then like you give me a 5 and then that makes me look good. So however, the harder part is actually the next level. So your first is reaction, learning, behavior, results. And so the executive presence training, I actually didn't get to attend that, but I did hear a lot of people talk about it. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I mean, I wanted to attend it. It's just like it was always full, and there was never like a single extra seat available for me, or I was training somebody else at that point. So with that executive presence training, probably everybody came out, they had a good reaction score and so forth. But there's sometimes a lot of trainings you come out of and you're like, you're happy, but did you actually learn anything? And for that learning, you would have some of the kind of like different analysis you could do. If you could say like some sort of test afterwards would be often a way you would confirm that of, hey, this person took a training, but can they also pass that? For example, if you were doing like medical school, you would do medical school, but then at the end of medical school, you have boards. And so you might have spent a beautiful time studying for 4 years straight, making your life miserable. But if you failed your boards, it was all for nothing. So that would be like, that's high pressure. You probably should not do that. And you're like good training, technical stuff. Don't make everything life and death and big at the end. But then you would really say behavior. Did it change the behavior? And so with something like the executive presence training, it was kind of word of mouth that that training did change behavior, and people felt that it was changing the behavior. And then finally the results, like what are the results actually coming here? And honestly, so level 1 smile, super easy to analyze. Learning, you can make a test, relatively easy to analyze. Behavior and results, those are honestly kind of the like holy grails of trainers. Like we want to create methods for that, but oftentimes these training things are these like second or third order effects that you might not see for 6 months. Like,
Yeah.
So to a certain extent, you obviously want a good training in the first place. Ideally, you would have a way to analyze this later on. And that could be a long process to figure out. But to a certain extent, I think it's a little bit of like, you have to keep trying new things to see what works. And if something you notice creates a good set of behaviors, share that with your colleagues. That's literally what you're doing here. So you are trying to change people's behavior and results by creating a place for people to learn more about it. And that's kind of the ultimate goal. So congratulations on your Kirkpatrick, at least level 3. So hopefully some level 4s from the folks listening.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that framework, and in a way, it's very similar to a lot of like organizational work where you're kind of making a bet that it will affect some of this third and fourth level, affect people's behavior and affect their more than just something you could measure on a test. Some leadership work is really like that too.
Right.
And sometimes you do it because you know that it will have some sort of a result. And sometimes even a subjective evaluation of it can be useful. Not as easy to measure, but useful.
Yep. And it is hard to do. Like, for example, even in my day-to-day training work, a matter of like, I taught somebody how to use this particular system. Did that actually make the organization better because they now have that particular skill? Occasionally, I can do that. Like within some, whenever I was with that National Instruments, there was some other folks. I was more of one of the minions within this overall structure, but there was basically a support team that they were working with, and they realized there were certain like higher level, certain like metrics they wanted everybody to hit that they weren't hitting. And so they, instead of saying like, let's train people how to support, instead they would say, let's actually train towards the metrics that we're wanting. Like, and they were able to actually, within relatively short order, they had basically start groups that started very regularly. National Instruments had this beautiful system, and I'm sad I don't really see it almost anywhere else, but basically they had this amazing recruitment engine that would go into top level engineering schools, and they would hire good, personable engineering graduates. And then they would bring them over to the company for a wage that was slightly above what a graduate would get at most other jobs for an entry-level job. They would bring those people in, and then they would say, all right, you are doing support for the next 6 months to 3 years. Ideally, we want you out of here in about 2 years. Now, where you go is anywhere in the company. You can do sales, R&D, marketing. In my case, I ended up doing training. I went through the system too. And they basically said, we want to home grow some of our leadership here, but we want to you first spend a lot of time with the customers, kind of learning some of their pain. And that was what we had this great progression of like a constant new batch of people that were motivated at the early stage in their career. And then we taught them everything we could about the company, about the products, how it worked, but then kept it always through the lens of how can we actually help our customers out? And then they would be working on like projects with marketing, or they'd work with a salesperson and be like, there's a big opportunity over here. I need you to help me close this deal. Or I need you to work hard to make sure that we can actually get this over the line. And you would basically be seen by different people within the org and then pulled over into those organizations as your skill set showed itself. So
That's wonderful.
It was a wonderful system. I wish there were more opportunities for that sort of stuff. And it was also really good in showing that kind of like this idea that learning wasn't a moment. we didn't train people for the first week and then expect them to be leaders within the R&D org. We trained them for like 4 weeks, and then we put them on calls, and then we trained them some more, and then we put them in a project, and then they did the project, and then they did this thing, and then they got some visibility over there, or they realized they really hated marketing because it was too much writing for them. So then they went back over to the other organization. And that is what a career path and these constant learning steps should kind of look like.
That's so well thought out, because it also provides, you're basically seeding all of your employee base with incredible customer context and empathy for the customer, which is really a wonderful competitive advantage. That's amazing.
They did. And granted, though, this was like whenever I first joined them was like 20 years ago or something like that. And then I ended up working through them and then going into training because I found out like, oh, I love teaching people how to do cool stuff. Like we made cool products that cool people used to make incredible things. So I wanted to teach them, and that was fun. And then I found out there was a job doing it, and I was like, okay, sweet. There's a job doing this.
Nice.
It's a challenge though, because like 20 years ago, you had a lot more employer stability. Like a lot of people that I know in engineering leadership, they might be with a company that they're really passionate about, but you're relying on a round of seed funding, or you're hoping that there's 16 products competing in the same space and you're hoping you're the one that survives.
Yeah.
And that's really tough to make this like consistent building program. And also employers too have gotten more fickle. Like it used to be like you would have a company and somebody would stay there their entire career. And now companies tend to drop people faster and people tend to drop companies faster. So there's a little bit less incentive to do that, which makes me a little sad because I like the idea of growing people really no matter where they end up.
In this environment of essentially companies investing less in the growth of their employees and viewing employees as a little bit more transitory, where is training most high leverage? Like where should companies really focus their efforts on training their employees, and where does it make the most sense nowadays?
It's a great question. And honestly, I think one that we're just in general still all trying to figure out. Like I don't have 100% solid answer. I can say that in principle, if you have an employee that you hired because you were like, I think this person has talent in this area, I think the number one thing that you as a manager should be doing is saying, hey, I don't know what's going to happen next year. I don't know what's going to happen 3 years, 5 years from now. Like in some respects, like I would love to see us grow professionally. But at the end of the day, I want you, my employee that I manage, to be worth more to the company. And no matter where you end up, I want you to be as valuable as possible in your professional career. And I think if you come in with that mindset, you end up in the right places. Like one of the last jobs I did at Ledger, we had a support team coming in, and we also had places we needed to fill. So, and kind of as a trainer, one of my goals with them was like, hey, I know this particular support job is not like at this particular rung, it's not where you want to be at for your entire career. I think you're talented. I want to see you working like maybe in this area of the company or that area of the company. So my goal with the training is basically like saying, I will train you on anything because I want you to be great, because I think you really can be great. And there's always new people coming in that we can be building up to. So like, think of it as like, how can we constantly be moving people upwards? Or like, honestly, if they're happy being somewhere, how can we take them at that particular point? Like maybe they're somebody that helps pull people up to their point and then shoves them on to the next point or something like that. So allow people to be happy if they're happy in a place, but if they want to grow, you see the ability there, like keep investing in them because it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me like that maybe there's two things that come to mind if I'm answering my own question.
Yeah. No, I would love to hear. I do not have all the answers.
Like one area that seems very high leverage is onboarding and like getting people to understand this new environment that they're in and being successful in that environment. That seems like every company really could benefit from their employees having better context, understanding the customers better, understanding their product better, understanding how the company works, all of those things. And then the other thing that comes to mind is that like companies that there are some companies that actually distinguish themselves by being really learning organizations and organizations that where you, part of the appeal of being there is that you're going to grow and you're going to the company environment is one that you want to be a part of, and that's part of the appeal of the company. It's part of their like strategy for hiring and retaining people. And like, you know, a lot of in a lot of competitive environments you want to be the best place to work.
Yeah.
If you don't care about that, maybe you don't care about it.
So, no, those are two excellent places to do
Yeah.
training. So, as a trainer, almost every organization is going to need some sort of onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
For example, whenever I came into New Relic, even as great as it was, as much lightning as we captured in the bottle hadn't been sealed. And
Yeah,
so
totally.
it kept escaping out of the bottle too. So then in some of the gap analysis we did there, one of the pieces that we realized is that people are coming in with this huge range of skills, going out to a huge number of different teams that needed different skills.
Yeah.
And some of our biggest things actually within that company, within that onboarding for the product organization is predominantly what I was in charge of. We realized that the issues we were having with our product a lot of times were because somebody on the agent's side of things was doing something that didn't make sense for how the data was stored. And then somebody on the front end didn't really know how the data was stored because that was not part of their jobs. They didn't really know the people there. Like they couldn't just pop over. Like, so we found out within our organization, like at that time, everything was like physical office presence. So there was a whole bunch of like, if you don't feel comfortable knowing somebody over there, you won't pop over there and just ask them a quick question. And getting that was a big chunk of the onboarding training for New Relic was saying, we need to break down these silos. So within our training, instead of saying, hey, we're going to have a new agents onboarding and a new back end onboarding and a new front end onboarding, instead we said we want all these people to onboard together so that they know one another. And we are going to create some like community bonds within that structure so that, and then that is one of those like down the road, you looked at like the other things like the behavior changes, and that did create true behavior changes of now you have like mixed lunch groups coming together. You have people that are not afraid to ask somebody because I know them on the agents team and they're nice enough. They can point me to the right person. And
Yeah.
so onboarding, huge point of leverage for sure. And then the continual learning, that is beautiful. If you can be involved in an organization like that, I think that is really the ideal. And that kind of gets to what I said earlier of as an engineering manager, your goal should be to make the people better when they leave you than when they
Yeah.
came to you.
One other thing, I kind of want to test this idea on you and see
Let's see
what
where
you
it goes.
think. If you're in a company that's growing rapidly,
Yeah.
one of the things that I observed at New Relic was that there was this incredible leverage in the new employees because, like, we knew that in a year or two, half those employees were going to be new.
Yep.
And so it felt like if we wanted to change anything, often one of the easiest ways to change things was to change how the new people thought about it rather than the old people. And so this, I think, became almost like a management meme, and it probably caused all sorts of problems for you. But one of the ideas was that, like, if we want to change something in our culture or our in the way we think about problems, we don't just do it through our own management work, but we also embed that in our training so that we're kind of guaranteeing that the new crop of people really understands the new way of thinking. And so a lot of like how we build product and how we think about teams and how we like all of these things really became kind of embedded in training over time. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective, like, what do you think about that? What was good and bad about that, and how do you think of it?
So I think it's great. I think ultimately if you want to create change, you need to just start moving forward with it. And we kind of mentioned within the training realm of things that it's like 70, 20, 10. Like most of the training you're doing is really going to be in that team interaction. So I think, for example, there were some teams that they were like, hey, I think we want to do party programming or like group programming on some of our stuff. And this is going to help us out because we have some new members that aren't super familiar with like even the IDDs and how they work. So we're going to do this all together. And they just decided one day, like, we're going to do that as some of them.
Yeah.
And then new people came onto the team and they're like, this is how my team works. To a certain extent, as an engineering manager, maybe the advice is fake it till you make it. So like create this thing. And if you want it to happen, try to make it happen. And then just be willing to reevaluate kind of as time goes on. Like, for example, with the party programming, some people are like, well, party seems a little intense. Can we just have it be like group together programming or like maybe change the name? Or like some of the folks were like, hey, I'm a little introverted. I need some time to myself. And so it was like, okay, we aren't going to do this all day. We'll do this for like 2 hours of the day or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think come in with an idea, try it. It
Yeah.
could be wrong, and just be willing to change it as you move forward. And I think that's part of that learning organization thing. And if you do need training, for example, like if you were trying to do the party programming model, I don't even know, does that have a newer, better name now? Or is that,
I hear people, I think the term people are coalescing around is maybe mob programming.
okay. All right. So,
Yeah.
all right.
I don't know why mob won out, but
Fair enough.
mob rule, I guess.
So,
Yeah.
I did make that decision, but fair enough. So you might have some additional training you would need to do, like what are the tools we need to do here? And so that would be maybe something you'd look to say like, all right, I want to train folks on this, and then just make sure there's some sort of test or evaluation there involved.
That makes sense. So when you think about how engineering leaders have partnered with you in the past, or leaders in general
Yeah.
have partnered with you in the past, what are the various ways that they've worked with you, and what's been better or worse?
Okay, here's the worst way possible. There is a company that I worked with, and they wanted to fire a good 4 or 5 people. They were like, these people, we don't like them. But it wasn't easy for them to fire in their particular like geographical area. And so what they needed to do is they needed to create a training that these particular individuals would fail.
Oh God.
So
Oh man, that's horrible.
that is literally the worst training I've ever like. And I basically balked on that. I'm like, I'm not going to create a training to try to fire people. Like, this is awful. Like,
Oh my
so
God.
I could create a training to like make us all better, and like you're betting pretty strongly that those people won't pass. And if they happen to not pass, okay, I guess that's good for you. But
Wow.
I did not feel like that was so that would be the worst. If you're literally making a training as a hoop to fire somebody, you're the worst. So then the question is the best way. The best way I would say is actually one of my absolute favorite moments was I came into New Relic. I was brand new there, and you were in the room at the time, I believe, and a lot of other directors and managers. It was a meeting, so it was just like it was 11 a.m. on a Thursday for y'all. But I basically just said, I want all of you to just take some time and just write down the problems or the struggles you're having that you want to solve with training, and basically just gave everybody a whole bunch of post-it notes and just had everybody write down the things. And then we took all of those and we put those on a board, and then we just kind of grouped those and said, okay, what are these big key issues? And then I had everybody, like, once we had a little bit of time to think about these things, had everybody just say, like, if you're going to prioritize these, how would you prioritize them? And everybody had slightly different priorities, but ultimately I was able to come up with, like, that's what made the New Relic onboarding so great, is a group of people with different perspectives, all independently thinking on their own, and then coming together and collaborating towards a better future. That's the best possible scenario.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, so basically it was like that group of people thinking deeply about like how can we make this organization better? What is the most important place for us to focus?
Yes.
That's great.
And
That's great.
and I guess that's kind of that's always the challenge with engineering management too, is you have so much of your life spent in meetings, and sometimes just meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. At least the ones you own, can you turn those into a space and a time to give people the time to kind of think through before they just react and talk?
Yeah.
So this is one area I will say Amazon actually did really well, is they had a a general idea of like, I'm going to create a one pager or create some sort of documentation. And I'm not going to expect you've done your homework before this meeting. I think that's a really good assumption for most tech fields right now. So spend literally the first 5 minutes of the meeting in silence. Learn what it is you're supposed to learn, then maybe have some discussion, and then do the work in the meeting. Like, can you give yourself some additional like silent reflection time? Can you have independent thought and then come together and make that better?
Yeah. I really love that approach. I think we expect everybody to just carve out this independent, like thoughtful time themselves, but it's so weird that we do that. Like
right.
everybody that comes to that meeting has to do the same work.
Yeah, like my partner's in management chain, and like it's just shocking to me sometimes of like, okay, well, they're up at 7 a.m. to start the meetings, and then the meetings
Right.
keep going and going and going, and sometimes it's 3 p.m. They've barely been able to run and use the restroom. There's been no food put in their system. Their tank is
Right.
completely empty, and now it's one of those like, all right, now get all of your thoughtful, heady work done in the next 90 minutes before you run to childcare to go pick up the kids.
Right.
So that's not possible. So we've got to find ways, I guess, like in the management side of things, like, can you get more of the work done in the meeting, even if it does create maybe that awkward moment of just like silence on the call or something like that? Because the Amazon meetings are kind of awkward. Like,
Yeah.
humans want to come in and they want to be like, hello, how are you? And instead it's just like homework, homework, homework. So, and you got to find what works for you. That's not going to work for every team and every org.
I'd like to turn our attention a little bit towards the recent past. And so much is changing nowadays with AI. I'm kind of curious how that's affecting the training field and how it's affecting how you're using that technology to like skill people and up level them and make them better. Like, what role is AI playing in that nowadays?
AI is huge. If you're going to build any sort of true training program at this point, AI is going to have to be an integral part of it. And I think that's overall a pretty good thing, but it can be done really poorly. So how would I use AI? I've been wrestling with this a lot. My actual last year, one of the things I've been working on is a passion project where I was like, okay, AI is definitely in everybody's future, no matter what. I have some kids that are kind of like right at the crux of where I think that like AI is going to potentially like create some really awful stuff or some really amazing stuff, and I don't think we're going to get rid of it. So I actually made a company, and we did after school programs teaching like middle school and elementary kids how to use AI. And especially with
Hmm.
my middle school kids, that ended up being a lot of fun, really, really challenging. And one thing that just blew me away is that I was having to make lesson plans literally on a day-to-day basis. Like it was because so much is changing in that particular field. Now, I was training for AI. The real question here is, how do you use AI to help you train? And I think that answer is a lot easier. So one of the things I really, really love is there is, and again, finding out things relatively soon. So I was listening to another podcast called Hard Fork via New York Times. And on there, they actually had Mackenzie Price from the 2 Hour Learning School. And so this school is basically completely gone all in on AI with this concept of like, how can we get most of our learning done in a relatively short amount of time? And then spend the rest of our time working on things we just kind of want to do. And one of the things that they're doing with AI, at least from what Mackenzie described, obviously she is an evangelist for her organization and so forth. But one of the things I really loved, and she's also working with K through 12. K through 12 is obviously a little bit different than engineering management, but there are a lot of echoes that I think could translate over to a more corporate style training. So one thing they do is they basically say like, all right, I'm at fifth grade math. For fifth grade math, what task do I have to fully understand? Like, obviously, I'm going to need to fully know my multiplication tables just like by rote. I'm going to need to know how to add, subtract, divide, some of that simple stuff. And so, what they do is for their schooling, they actually have tests that basically just say, task A, can you perform this? If so, let's move on. Task B, can you perform this? Ooh, that's a bit challenging here. Here's what you need to know about task B. Task B now? Okay, good. And so thinking about things is like breaking it down into individual tasks. And that's a lot of what I do as a trainer within organizations is if the A to B is a skill gap, we figure out what are the tasks and then train to each one of those. The key difference that AI is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow somebody like me to be more developing the system and not front of classroom. And then it's going to allow you to then have a system that's going to say like create customized quizzes and so forth. And you can even do this for yourself, just for your own personal learning. Like I did, there's better resources and so forth, but I did some coursework recently at a university and I'm trying to up-level myself in some other areas. And it was kind of amazing. I was able to literally take the professor's transcript and an AI tool was used to turn that into text. And then I was able to take that text and say, can you summarize this transcript? And then I was able to take that and I would say, okay, that was from this section of the book. Can you take what they spoke about and the section of the book, merge the two of those into some sort of notes, and I want you to quiz me on what I should have learned from this particular lecture. And
Oh,
I could
wow.
do that every day is I could create like a 10 quiz question for myself and review that so that whenever it came time for the test, I had already been doing question after question after question on task, and it allowed it to be a lot easier for me. Now, still some hard work come test time, but those sorts of things, like how could we pull that into our engineering organization?
Oh, that's fascinating. I love how individualized that is. And, of course, AI has its problems and everything, but it does really show you kind of a future where you can kind of press fast forward on the parts that you already know and,
Yep.
pause and go back and repeat
Right.
things or actually have it recreated for you kind of continually until you master something.
Yep.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and one thing I really love doing as a trainer is I love making sure that whatever the output is of your training, is that something that can be evaluated by somebody else? So,
Hmm.
oh man, I'm trying to remember the exact subsystem, but basically there was a particular subsystem within New Relic, and one of the trainings we actually did on there is to say like we granted somebody some like micro admin. It was like an admin training for one of our systems that was like mission critical, but also if you messed it up, everything's messed up. So we didn't want any big mistakes to happen. So we gave them like mini admin settings for a certain subset of people, and the training was basically like learn these pieces, and then the result of the training was if you can update this file to have your name in it, you pass the
Oh,
training. And
interesting.
so then as a
Yeah.
manager, you didn't need to do anything other than just say like, hey, is their name there? And if their name is there, they would have had to jump through all the hoops
I love
to be
that.
able to
It's
put
like
their name there.
self-certifying.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, this has been so much fun. I've really learned a lot from this conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show today. Um, I guess I have two questions for you. If anybody wants to contact you and wants to hear more or um, ask you questions or contact you professionally, how do they find you?
sure thing. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't post a lot there, but my contact information will be there. And then hopefully there's show notes or something like that where we can also put my contact information in there. And maybe if you email me, just put Jade in the top so that it doesn't get lost within the other emails. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the second question is there's something you want people to take away from this call or to walk away thinking about training?
Sure thing. I think the biggest thing I would want you to walk away with in regards to training is don't think of training as a singular moment that is going to be some big event. Think of training as these small, consistent steps. Just like working out at the gym, you're going to see much better results of going 3 times a week than you will from just like, I lifted weights really hard in January once. Why am I not huge? The same thing happens with our minds is it takes consistent effort to create that lasting change. And always just think of your people from the fact of like, or from the perspective of, I want to help these people to be better when they leave than when I got them. And be thinking of those, work with people, work with their passions, use the tools around you. If you need some additional help, talk to somebody like me. And if you have motivation issues, try to solve some of those in good working meetings with your fellow managers.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Decoding Leadership. As always, I welcome your questions and feedback. And if you're looking for coaching or advisory help, you can contact me at rubik.com. See you next time.